Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new How to Base. This is How to Base 52, and today we'll be talking about some vocoder business. Um, I'm going to play you this track, which is a sketch of a drop I'm working on, and what I want to focus on are these guys, very plainly vocoder related, in the sense that we have the bass, the parameters of the bass, and then the modulator, which is actually a recording of me making weird sounds. So I'll play it. As usual, it's pretty loud, so beware your volume. Playing in 3, 2, 1. Dat reverb decay. Okay, so the reason why I wanted to bring up this bass in particular is because I departed from my usual process of designing a carrier for it. I mean, I have sometimes I arrive at this by accident, but this time I actually did it on purpose. So that's what it sounds like. I'm gonna make this unique so I can mess around with it. So what's happening here is that this is a vocoder bass with a carrier being a Citrus FM channel and the modulator being my voice. So actually, I'll show you what the modulator sounds like by itself. It's kind of funny. I basically just opened up an Edison, like in my voice channel, and just talked and said weird things. I have this big old file. Like the file it's full of stuff, and it goes on for a while. And then what I do is I cut up bits, and then I move it around until I find something that sounds good. And then and by sounds good I mean I actually play it through the vocoder because I have no idea how that's going to apply to the bass. I dig that. So what I'm talking about here is about certain things I do with the carrier. The modulator is just whatever. I usually use vocal samples from the vocal samples pack here. You can see in some of my past vocoder related videos, that's what I do. But what I've done here is I have made a super harsh FM carrier. And like I will demonstrate for you how harsh right now. Now, this is kind of loud, so I recommend that you don't have your stuff at full volume right now. So, also let's bear in mind that that's what that sounds like put through a bunch of compression. That's what that sounds like by itself completely. But let's talk about why we made that sound the way that we did. So let's look back at the vocoded sound. That's correct. Bring you back. Normally what I do is I use a kind of like a similar, I mean, this is actually the same patch that I like to use, but what I normally do is I make it more like an acceptably clean FM sound. There's always a little bit of distortion and interesting harmonics that'll be present doing the kind of formanty FM stuff that I like to do. But this time I basically designed the patch while listening to it in the vocoder, and that's important. And then when I was done with it, I noticed that it ended up just being harsher, and that's because it basically means that the more activity there are and more parts of the spectrum, the more the vocoder has to work with when you apply the modulator to it. So actually, let's see. This FM patch is a bit complex. I've covered it before in previous sort of things, but the way that this works is that in the main modulating operator, which is 2 here, I'm modulating operator 1 with operator 2. I'm doing negative, but it doesn't really matter. In here, I've set the oscillator section here. I've actually engaged certain harmonics. Now, in the past, I would have recommended that you do this with separate operators. I would have made operator 3 pitch 64 and then put that in there like that, and then that would basically have done the same thing as if I had engaged this harmonic here. So the reason why I did this though is because when I don't do that, because the second part of that is that I will then modulate the high harmonic independently from the main operator that's modulating the output, and that'll get you some cool, kind of interesting movement. But I wanted to see how cool I could get it if I were to modulate the whole thing, and so I have extremely lightly set, as you see, like that's like 2 or 3% of FM going into here, and it is achieving the same sort of modulation on the high harmonic, but it's also modulating everything else, which is creating additional coolness. And so I have 3 in there, and then I also have 5 in there because 3 is a saw or triangle wave. It's actually been moved over closer to a saw wave, but the triangle, your two options for smooth FM synthesis are sine and triangle waves. I explain why in How to Base 50 and How to Base 6, which are both basic overviews of FM synthesis and formant sounds as used in either FM8, which is How to Base 50, or Citrus, which is How to Base 6. So that's why I'm kind of glossing over this, because I've talked about it. And if you want to find out more, watch those videos. That's my recommendation to you. Which they had those two options, and they create very different sort of characters, but I wanted a mix of both, so I made a mix of both. That's what I did. And then the way this Oscillator Harmonics tab works is that you introduce extra harmonics, and you can fuck with the waveform like that. And then you have this is amplitude, and then this is phase. So as you see, it changes the starting position of that harmonic, and you can, as you see, I can change the starting harmonic of individual harmonics, which can make extremely interesting shapes and very interesting FM behavior. But as you see, I also changed the starting phase of this operator going into I basically mess with the phase of a whole bunch of stuff, and I yielded interesting results. Operator 6, I actually did want to go out. Operator 6, I usually leave I did operator 4, because operator 4 is not doing anything. I have an extra oscillator going out that's just a sine wave, and the volume should be, the volume is modulated as such, because when your modulation is total, when the modulating operator, operator 2, is modulating operator 1 fully, it's actually not very much like the original shape of the waveform, including the fundamental. So the fundamental is not very present anymore. So then I wanted to reinforce that with number 4 there, which, as you can see, it creates emphasis on the sine harmonic of the fundamental, which makes the bass smooth. I'm basically sub-reinforcing. That's what that is. But I'm doing it internally, so I don't have to do that separately. Yeah. So lots of phase changing. So I also mess with phase with the high harmonics that create the formanty sound. Now, I usually start with this one being 5 octaves. And I get that kind of sound, that sort of almost froggy sound. I'm also going to return the phases to normal so you can see what that sounds like. My, that is very clean. Let me get that sound, which is the basic sort of FM vocal sound. Now, now you see it's actually getting it, like to my ear that sounds too smooth. So I want some differences. I want some change, and that's where changing the phase of your of the things that I'm modulating the operators comes into play, because that really kind of dicks up the sound. And as you saw, extremely small changes in these parameters created big changes in the sound. So there's very huge possibilities in terms of like what the kind of sound you can make. And as you may have noticed, the lower the harmonic, the lower the overall formant characteristic is. And you could just keep going down lower. But eventually that gets to be not so useful. My recommendation is that you worry about the overall, like the final formant depth and like tone of that to the vocoder, because that's what it's doing, really. a lot of fun to mess around with this particular thing. Now, you could do this in FM8, but what you will need to do is you need to represent these individual harmonics as entirely different operators. So I think there are enough operators that you could do this without the sub reinforcement, and then you just do the sub reinforcement with some other plugin. So what you would do is you have, let's say, actually I'll just show you this. This is not gonna be perfect. Where's FM8? I know I have it. There it is. Okay. FM8. Now this isn't going to sound like anything because I'm not going to get the modulation right, but so we have F. If F is the output, we want to modulate that by E. So that would be like if this would be as if we modulated that by number 2 up here. So now number 2 has the fundamental harmonic, a high harmonic, and then a higher harmonic. So we need 2 more operators to do that. Now, you could do that, or you could actually have the 2 of them go into E, like so. This creates a simplicity of modulation in terms of automating the sound, because then you only have to modulate the volume of E to get the actual total movement in the sound. But really, what you want is C and D to go into F independently of E. And then you want to modulate all of these by B. So modulate these by B, this by B, and that by B. And then you want to modulate, so what would that be? B, yeah. So by the way, the primary fundamental here is actually a triangle originally. So that's what you want. You want E to be a triangle. You want C and D to also be triangles. So E, C, and D are triangles. F is a sine wave. The output modulator is usually good to be a sine. You can make it a triangle. Sometimes it sounds cool. But really anything other than that will lead to disaster and sadness. Just so you know. And then you want A to be a sine wave, and then you want to modulate A into C, D, and E. And this is a triangle, and this is the sine wave, and that combination creates the combination that we see here. And also, you want to be very light modulation. Now, the additional thing I have here is that 5, which is a sine wave, is modulated by 6 just a little bit. So then you would want to modulate A by a sine wave a little bit. So I guess you could do feedback to make that work. But the only problem is that there's phase differences. Now, this is where it gets tricky in FM8 because I don't know how to change the phase of an operator. I know you can invert it. I know that's the thing you can do, but I don't think you can actually change the phase lightly, which is what I'm doing. But if you can figure out how to do that, that's how this configuration is how you would do that in FM8. And you would want to modulate C, D, and E's total volumes to create the FM movement. That would be the mod X equivalent in this citrus instance, and then number 5 and number 6 into 2, or is it just number 5's volume? One of these volumes is mod Y, so it's 5 and 6. So 5 and 6 into 2, well, 5 into 2 and then 6 into 5. They're both modulated volume, which again, the modulation type that we hear in the FM, the principal way to do that is to change the volume of the modulating operator. So when we go into number 1, we have the mod input being changed, which is what the X target is in Citrus. What that's doing is that's changing how much volume is going into operator 1 from every other operator, which is just 2 for right now. But if you had more than that, that's really the thing that makes Citrus easier to use for me, is that you could have more than one operator going in there, and then you won't have to modulate the volumes of each individual operator. But you can do that in FMA. What you would do is you have amp mod this setting here, and then you would just link it to the mod wheel, and then you link all of them into the mod wheel like so, and then you would link A and B to something else because there's only one mod wheel. But You can link it to some kind of controller. However you do your modulation and your automation, that's how you would do it. And then you would kind of get the sound, because FM8 is weird. It's weird. You have to turn key sync on for all of these, because if you don't, then the phases will be different every time you hit a note. And that's what bugs me. A lot of things about this bug me. It bugs me. So anyway, this is a brief overview of how you would accomplish this sort of stuff in FM8. But really, Citrus is better for this sort of stuff. Yeah. So that's that. So let's talk about how things are going on in the Vocodex. So I had this open up to the modulator pitch shift window, and again, I've covered how this works in a previous How to Bass. I forget what it's called, but the title of the How to Bass is how Vocodex works. It's a pretty easy it's pretty easy to find that in my channel. It's one of the more recent ones, so there's that bonus too. The modulator pitch shift window. So we have an overall pitch shift. But what this section does is it individually changes the pitch change of individual bands, because by default you have lots of options. So it's very direct control of how the pitch shapes the bands that apply to the carrier. And then, of course, you also have the overall change. Now, that's not changing the actual audio input of the modulator to be higher or lower. It's just moving the bands that it interprets from the analysis. So that's why that can work as well as it does. I also have, I basically killed everything up that's low down here, but I have the carriers pass through all the way up, but this is low pass to be very low. This is so that you can have bass reinforcement in the sound as a whole. Sounds kind of cool, actually, with more of that in there. I'll experiment with that later. I have it on order 4 because order 4 sounds cool. Set bandwidth to taste. I believe I also have some changes going on to band distribution. Nope, that's the same. Bandwidth is a bit different. So, okay, the way that I mess with the bandwidth now is that the smaller the bandwidth, the more high frequency action there is, and the wider the bandwidth, the more original carrier and activity is the same. So by default, got this here. I engage a little bit of diminished bandwidth on the high frequencies to keep them high frequency. And then I raised sort of like the mids. I had it up here, but I'm doing it now, and I kind of like that. And so that's sort of the purpose behind what I do with this sort of thing. So that's why I do that. I have a slightly higher than average bandwidth count. 47 is the default. I had it up to like 50 something. More bands equals more CPU usage, so if that's a problem for you, you should realize that. Yeah. This setting here is more like the modulator, and this is more like the carrier. I like a nice healthy combination kind of deal. And this is this attenuates a particular kind of effect. So that glassy kind of effect that we're all familiar with from using Vocoder. This when you have it, you turn it up high enough, it sort of goes away, and that's good for most applications. But sometimes you want a little bit in there to sort of send home the main character of the sound, and so that's what this helps you. Kind of thing. Now, much like FM synthesis, a lot of these controllers are very touch and go. It's very, you mess with it a little bit and massive, huge changes end up happening. But it's still overall a combination of the carrier and the modulator that will define how the sound will sound. The reason why this particular sounds a little bit different than usual is because it's actually my voice in the modulator as opposed to one of the audio samples from the voices sections here, which I have used a lot in the past. That one sounds different now. Oops, didn't want to do slip edit. And then you also just want to modulate the FM stuff as much as you want all the time, just forever. Lots of goodness. Yeah. So I believe this is a pretty comprehensive overview of what this bass is all about. And at its heart, it's a pretty simple. It's the standard sort of thing that I do in terms of FM and vocoding stuff. But the key differences are the FM is way harsher, and I showed you a little bit about how to accomplish that. And the modulator is something different. Like the character of the sound will be really all about what the modulator is. And so it's different because I experimented by using my own voice, but it might also be different if you use elephant's scream or something, like, or use like water kind of thing. So people do that sometimes. Or if you use like, I actually have vocoded like hardware patches by FM synthesis patches, and that's been fun. So like if it's all starting to sound the same, like you can do big edits in how Vocodex interprets the modulator, but really if the modulator is different, there will be big differences in how the sound turns out. And same thing with the carrier. If the carrier is big and different, then there will be big differences in how the sound comes out. So it's really all about mashing worlds together to create new life. So if you have any questions, let me know. I will try to answer them. And as usual, have a nice day. The nicest day.